square it up a little bit, bring it back around. There we go. Thank you, man. Thank you, man. I'm going to lower just a little bit.
Welcome on behalf of my family. My name is Paul Jett. I'm Bill's son, youngest child. I want to welcome you to our dad, Bill Jett's graveside service. Most of you know my dad was tough, real tough. Some have even described him as having tough love, but really it goes deeper than that. So just to kind of get us started, can I get a show of hands or maybe an amen if my dad ever said something to you along the lines of, put your big girl panties on?
Amen.
Suck it up, buttercup. Maybe something a little more direct that I can't say at a graveside service. I'm in the crew. Okay, just want to make sure you guys are at the right place. That's this Bill Jett. So, this place is very dear and sacred to Dad. That bench over there, their signatures. He'd come here on mornings, and other than his office, man, this was his place. This is where he liked to be. This was his sacred place. It's our sacred place as well. You guys are welcome back here anytime. I hope I get through this today, but any of you guys that want to talk, you're gonna have the opportunity to talk after I get done running my mouth. But I hope I send my dad out the right way. Of course, we talked about social distancing. Everybody's got your cell phones silenced. We know all that stuff. It's not our first rodeo, right? I was thinking about how to start this out, and the Jim Valvano, I love sports, and the quote from the 1993 ESPYs when he was diagnosed with cancer. I paraphrase, but he said, "If you laugh, you think, you cry, that's a full day. That's a heck of a day." Today's that kind of day. We're overwhelmed and humbled by the outpouring of support and love that we've seen for our dad. We always knew he was good at what he did, but we had no idea. After hearing from all of you, I've heard from half of Lexington about how he saved their marriage, saved their life, saved them from themselves. It's been pretty amazing. It's cemented what we already knew, but we could never measure. Growing up with a dad that's a psychotherapist, it's kind of like growing up with a dad in the CIA. You have a don't ask, don't tell type of thing, and if he does tell you, well, you know what happens. So, he was the consummate professional. You guys know that. He valued his relationships greatly. He was versatile, but he never crossed the line of confidentiality to his patients around us. I have no idea, as a medical doctor, how he walked that line all those years. The stress that he consumed and ate on a daily basis, no idea. It's been mind-boggling, as I said, to learn the impact he's had on so many. Getting the chance to talk to many of you guys. I never want to invite people to a funeral again, but it's been wonderful talking to each of you guys personally. And that relationship doesn't end. You're my dad's people, you're my people. As I said, other than his office, this was a sacred place. He would come here and have coffee and visit Mom. You guys know Dad had a thing for coffee, right? It's kind of his fuel, right? It was his energy, it was his juju, it was his juice. He liked it straight black, and it didn't matter what temperature, right, Margaret? Doesn't matter. Anytime, any day, didn't matter how long it's been sitting out, he drank it. So, that's the truth. I talked to you about the opportunity to share any words if you feel comfortable, and I mean that. If you don't have the words today, you come back and visit. You might see me up here on the weekends. It's not your cup of coffee to get up here in front of people. It's not an easy thing to do. I understand. If coffee's not your thing, maybe you want to pick up an A&W root beer float on the way in on Main Street, just to honor my mom a little bit. Phyllis, Nana. That was her drink of choice. Also her drug of choice, to tie in the psychotherapy world a little bit. I kind of always joke that that Dad would just wake up dead in his office one day. He pretty much did that. He called a shot, right? 84 and a half years to the day. That's how he would have wanted it. I know today's a sad day, but we're going to honor him, and I don't want to dwell on the last 24 days of his life, but I do want to give you a couple of nuggets from that. It was hard to watch, man. I give my family great credit for sticking it out, toughing it out, staying by his side 24/7. It's not my giftedness. I can't do it. You call it fear, you can blame it on COVID, you can blame it on my cancer, you can do whatever you want, but it's not me. And I'm glad that there are people out there that can do it. I could really just blame it on my wife's self-diagnosis of my ADD, that I can't sit still for that long. But I want to thank you to St. Joe's staff, doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, everybody that touched Dad was great. Hospice wing, Dr. Borders, taking care of him all these years. Dad's not an easy person to take care of. I can tell you as a son and as a doctor that, you put together something like this and stubbing your toe is really easy to do. So I'm sure I'm missing people and I'm sure I'm going to leave some things out. So please forgive me in advance. Speaking of his last 24 days, it was a roller coaster, man. I can tell you, after I left the weekend before he died, I had a Holy Spirit awakening the Tuesday night. I sleep like a rock. I woke up and I just wide awake. Knew I had to be here. So of course, as Dad would have had me done, I worked on Wednesday, and I took my buddy Tom Hyde up on his offer to fly me up in his personal jet. It gave me about 3.5 hours more of good quality time with my dad. Y'all got to know, I'm scared of heights. I'm scared of flying. I'm scared of small spaces. So for me to get up there and do that, it's a pretty special guy. Shout out to Mary for preparing this little picnic for me, Jennifer, and Annette the night before he died. That was pretty cool. I'm not going to tell you everything that I talked to my dad about that night, but let's just say it was quiet, the lights were off. He heard me. He understood I was going to carry the torch for him. And he knew we had his back. And he knew we were all good and grown up. It's two different things. That was his fear. Dad did things on his own time. You're going to hear that recurring theme throughout my eulogy. But in those last days, he even woke up in his own little way. And he told us bye individually. His way. All the time. Before I get too ugly cry up here, I want to tell you guys that we're having a celebration of life for him. Tentatively planned Saturday, April 3rd, day before Easter. It's going to be in Johnny Holler, and it's going to be a great celebration. Rebecca and Dale are filming this for us, and we're going to replay whatever we want to replay, and we're going to live this out. We're going to celebrate him like no other, assuming COVID's out of our way. Hopefully it is. And if the Cats are in the Final Four, maybe we'll watch that too. Speaking of COVID, Dad never let anything get in his way. Of course, we're going to take the right precautions today, but Dad wasn't scared of anything like that. In fact, I say we're turning this into a positive instead of a negative. We're not in a church. We're not sitting in a pew. We're out here in God's beauty at His special place. So take that, COVID. Although He may never admit it, I know He would want you all here to give Him His due. He may not have come up into this world easy with a lot of fanfare, but we're doing our best to send Him out with the pomp and circumstance He deserved. He's going to go out with a bang. So those are my opening comments. I'm going to ask my nephew, his grandson, Chase McIntosh, to deliver our opening prayer. Chase is a wonderful young man, and he has a heart for God. Chase, come on up.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to open with this verse from John. On the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, "Let anyone who's thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." Now let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for all these people gathered together to celebrate this man's life, Lord. Thank you so much for my grandfather Bill. Thank you so much for the spiritual gifts that you gave him. Thank you so much for the wisdom and strength that you've given him to lead his family, that you gave him the strength to glorify yourself through him. Thank you so much that you gave him the strength and the love to take care of his children and his grandchildren, Lord. Thank you that he expressed those spiritual gifts throughout his life, Lord. Thank you so much that you sent your son to save us and save his soul, Lord. I just want to thank you for that today. Thank you so much that Jesus came down for sinners like me and sinners like all of us, Lord. Thank you so much for my grandfather's life, Lord, that he put such a value on family, Lord, and he cared about his children and his grandchildren, God. And because of values like that, Lord, we're able to be here and celebrate his life. Thank you that he cared about his wife, and because he cared about his wife, Lord, he was able to have such a welcoming household where everyone was welcomed in. Everyone felt like they were family when they entered their house. I was welcomed in, Lord, and because I was welcomed in, I feel like I was family. I was the least of these, Lord, but because I was the lesser, I was lifted up, Lord. I was glorified. Thank you so much, Lord, for this day. Thank you that we're all able to be gathered here to celebrate Bill's life, Lord. Even though even though Christ died, Lord, he was resurrected, and it says in the gospel, Lord, that those who die with Christ are resurrected with him. So thank you so much, Lord, that you prepared a place for Bill, and you prepared a place for everyone that believes, Lord. So thank you so much for that. I just wanted to close with a quote from C.S. Lewis that says, "Death opens a door out of a little dark room. That's all the life we have known before it, into a great real place where the truth shines and we shall all meet." Amen.
So, last Wednesday night, I spent the night with my dad on that crappy little couch in the hospital room, taking over from Frank for a night. One of the hardest things I ever did, but also one of the best things I ever did. This might be harder. I haven't written anything down and public spoke word for word my entire life that I can remember. I can't remember taking notes on anything unless I'll go back to college. As my wife's always said, I've got a photogenic memory, and I get a lot of that from Dad. But this is word for word. This is going to be tough. Dad was buried in a purple jacket, so I went out and got one close as I could find yesterday to honor him. The eggshell robin pants, those are just a bonus, Dad. I'm not trying to outdo you. Daryl McCarty was Dad's longtime clothier at Logan's. He was at the visitation last night, and he texted and said, we always joke that whenever Logan saw Dad coming, they started saying cha-ching, right? Because they knew he was an easy mark. So Daryl said his tagline to Dad was this. He said he'd have Dad try a few things on. He'd say, "You look dangerous in that one, Bill. That's the one." And Dad would say, "Well, if that's the one, let's do it." Oftentimes he'd follow that up if he really liked it. Say, "You have this in Paul's size? So, you know, how do you summarize 84 and a half years in a couple hours? You don't. You can't do it in a graveside service. I'm not going to try. But what I will attempt to do is to tell you who my dad was and what he stood for. How he has impacted my life and the life of many others. You guys have already known this, but my disclaimer to all of you, in case there's any attorneys in the audience, I use humor on the regular to get through my day. So forgive me in advance. Just so you have a small insight into the sick pathology that you're dealing with, my wife and I named our kids intentionally Pauline and Esther so we could call them polyester when they got to be teenagers like they are now. Kids, we set you up for a lifetime of counseling. Sorry, just kidding, not really. Speaking of which, you know, there are a few things that never really bothered my dad. Things like political correctness, not so much, right? Price of gas, he never paid attention to. Never paid attention to the number of birthday candles he had on his cake. Favorite cake, Mom's strawberry on strawberry. Annette, that's going to be your job. Anybody else knows how to make it, Mary Ann, make sure that happens. Age was just a number to Dad. You know, mostly he never paid attention to the weather forecast. Greg, Joe, Mike, you know, if a good downpour comes today while we're doing this, maybe it's just a sign of him laughing at us, but that just means Dad would only play 18 holes of golf that day instead of 36. You know, I recounted on Caring Bridge and shared with many of you guys. You had some positive comments about this, but I tried to add it up, you know. 125,000 hours of counseling people over his lifetime. For you guys doing the math at home, that's 52 hours a week for 50 weeks a year for 48 years. It's not even close to what he did. It's conservative. Think about the time my dad spent thinking about his patients, ruminating about his patients, oftentimes while practicing his golf swing without a club, right? Embarrassed my kids at First Watch a few months ago and I loved it. You know, this number never included the phone calls he would take at night. Even when we traveled when I was a kid, he never turned it off, man. You know, I'd like to share a story with you recently that came up when I was trying to teach my daughters about perseverance. And you all know I'm a doctor, but you know, it took me 3 years to get into medical school, and I try to use that as a positive teaching point to my kids. To which my youngest replied later, "Yeah, Dad, you're so stupid it took you 3 years to get into medical school." I don't think they quite got the point. But kids, if you don't get perseverance after hearing this today, you ain't gonna get it. So picture me as a business major, college junior, with a whopping 2.75 GPA, probably 90 hours of credits under my belt. Also under my belt, perhaps a little too much partying back in the day. I know nobody else can relate to that, but that was the case. I wanted to go to medical school and be a doctor. Well, I wanted to be a doctor. I didn't really know about medical school when I was a kid. Once I realized what it took, I kind of backed off that lofty aspiration. But then something clicked for me, and I said, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Now I can remember going into my parents' split-level house on 2938 Monte Vista. Lots of good memories there. I go up into the living room. Mom and Dad are on the couch. And I tell them, guys, we're sitting down drinking coffee. I said, I've made up my mind. I'm going to go to medical school. To which my mom promptly snorted coffee out of her nose and horse-laughed me out of the room. My dad, you know, he took it all in, kind of gave me that wry smile, and he never stopped supporting me since. Mom eventually came around too, but you know, as a doctor, we learn to mitigate stress, right? We learn to mitigate our burden at any cost. Burnout, you know, you pick up any medical journal, burnout, burnout, burnout. My dad, he did the opposite of that for 48 years. He constantly ran to the fire, no matter how hot or what time. In my mind, he was a professional, spiritual, and personal firefighter. Instead of burn out, he said, I'll burn in. How hot do you want it? He started every day with a plate of fire and chased it with a can of gasoline. He got up the next day and did it again. So, as I was trying to figure out my life, you know, at that time of medical school, I can remember taking one of those aptitude tests in college. You guys You know what I'm talking about. I don't remember which one it was, but I think the guy giving it to me had a social work degree. He was young. I was younger. And took the test, and he said, you're going to be one of three things, man. He said, you're going to be a bus driver, a social worker, or a funeral director, ironically. And I said, well, I can tell you, after this last month, there's no chance of me being a funeral director, so Katie, you're safe, wherever you are. But he said, it's not really like that. It means that, you're good with people, you can multitask, you have good leadership abilities, and so on and so forth. That's the bus driver and the funeral director. And he said, the social worker, you're good with people, but you don't want to be a social worker, there's no money in it. The guy said this to me, and I said, oh, well, my dad's a social worker. And he said, well, he tried to backpedal a little bit. He said, unless your dad's the exception to the rule, he said, he probably doesn't make a lot of money. And I said, my dad, he's the exception to the rule, right? So my dad did well for himself. Coming up from the bottoms of Frankfurt to what he did, he was proud of that, man. He didn't do it for the money, but he sure did like to live life. He wasn't a saver, he was a splurger, he was a spender. He planned on doing exactly what he did. Dad loved that story. So, when you go to a medical school interview, the quintessential question is, why do you want to be a doctor? What do you say, right?
To help people.
Kylan, to help people. Exactly. That's the generic answer everybody says. What does that mean? Right? So I'm sure I blurted out something, very generic and did what I did. But, thinking about it now, I didn't have the words articulated at the time. But I wanted to say, I remember thinking, dude, do you know who my parents are? It's just who I am. It's just what we do. Now, my dad didn't have much of a filter, and I don't really either, but I refrained somehow from that smart aleck response that I was going to give him. I ended up getting in eventually. Yeah, SE after 3 years. Now, this may be a poor analogy, but a fish lives his whole life in the water, so how would it explain what being wet feels like? He's never experienced anything else. That's how I feel when posed that question now. That's how ingrained it is in my DNA. Still something that's hard to describe, you just know it when you know it. I was born in it, I've lived my whole life in it. Another tribute to my dad is when I have medical students come through my office, they say, how in the world do you do all this? And I tell them, I was raised to outwork the other guy. And just because I have MD after my name doesn't mean I don't approach my job as a laborer every day. Now you can tell by my hands, I'm not a manual laborer, and I don't play one on TV. But my dad, not much of a laborer either. By the way, he had the best hands and feet in the ICU by a long shot, and that included the nurses and everybody visiting. The biggest arguments my dad and I ever got into, is a pretty good relationship, if you can say this, biggest arguments we ever got into in our adult life was why Stoops would sit on the ball with the lead, or why Calipari wouldn't play zone. But, as a kid, I can remember getting into it a little bit over cutting the lawn, back to my manual labor days. Dave, I couldn't cut the stripes just right for him, right? So he would give me the what for, that Earl Weaver kind of belly bumping, pointing the finger type of thing. And it's like, hey man, I'm doing what I do. I don't know. So I just seen it. Needless to say, I never picked up a lawnmower again or started one. So, but Dad, manual labor wasn't really his thing either. But I'd be remiss to tell you if I didn't mention that he kept the family farm going for 20 years. The Harris family farm that my mom was born into and my grandfather was born into. Generations beyond that, he's kept that thing going. Lots of manual labor help, of course. Now, I know I'm speaking primarily from my own perspective, but I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention my 4 talented sisters whom he helped raise. They all have a heart for service, and they're all good people. Jenny? She's a teacher, just like Mom. She's got the biggest heart for animals you've ever seen. If If you ever need something, she's there. And a nurse. Best caregiving skills I've ever seen. Also, in a crisis, you need something, she's there. Where's Mary? Y'all wearing purple and purple mask. I can't tell who's who. Mary's worked as a long-standing farm office manager. He's one of the most loyal and integral people I know. Other than being my phone friend on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire should it ever return to prime time. She's also one of my first calls in a crisis. R.I.P. to Regis, right? 2020's kind of sucked so far, hasn't it? Yeah. Annette, who's now a disability advocate, started her own nonprofit, motivated by helping her daughter, Gracie. She did this after spending 30 years in the food and beverage industry. I snuck that one in there for you, Annette. It's an inside joke. She really had a knack for that, and she was quite good at it. But she found her true calling by providing a voice for those who may not be able to. Sound like somebody else you know? My dad has had a role in all of our lives and deserves at least some of the credit, in my opinion, for raising us. He wanted to ensure that we were all grown and grown up, as I said, not the same things, before he left this world. And I can feel confident to say that both goals have been met. Further, as with any good parent, you want your kids to do better than you did in your legacy, and he's done that. And he set the tone for the grandkids, wherever you may be. He's watching. Perseverant and ever resilient. I can't help but think of the medical term allostasis. Allostasis says, how much stress can the body bear, or can the organism bear? My dad, I don't know how to measure it, but probably weighs, Dr. Bungie, Dr. Ruth, Mike, he had it in spades, man. You know, how is it that one person loses their apples over one simple thing, and my dad can take on the stress of 12 people's burdens a day for 50 years, plus whatever else, but he never broke. Don't get me wrong, he bent. If he couldn't find his matching socks, he might get a little bit, he might get a little tore up at home, but y'all might not have ever seen that. Maybe there's a little bit of that in me. He was mentally tough and physically tough, and he impacted that to the folks. He imparted that to the folks that he came in contact with. Maybe not necessarily by words, but definitely by his actions. You know, I got to tell you, I called Dr. Borders on this one. There was a small part of me that was kind of terrified. Who thinks that when your dad dies the day before, you got to think about shutting his practice down? But in fact, that was the case. You know, my mind, my science mind, I knew it was the right thing to do. I knew he wasn't coming through this, and if he wasn't going to be in any shape where he was going to show you all the chink in his armor to get back in there. But I'm going to tell you, there was part of me that was still terrified. If he ever woke up out of that mentally conscious state and got to the point of learning that I had to shut his practice down, talk about fear, right? You know, I talked with his accountant about what we do here, and he said, you know, can you sell the practice? I said, you can't sell what Dad had. That was a relationship, man. You know, I talked to his colleagues. They said, I'm paraphrasing, you know, we're not touching it. We're scared to pick it up. We can't fill those shoes. His patients probably not going anywhere else for a while if they need to. That's how it was, man. You can't sell social and intellectual capital or the relationship or the rapport. You can sell the physical stuff, but not the practice. I read a book at the end of business school called Drive. It's by Daniel Pink. I think it's an organizational psychologist. It's been pretty, you know, it's something I come back to in my mind a lot when I think about, you know, my happiness or my unhappiness on a day-to-day basis. And it basically said these three things. It said that what drives successful people, what makes them tick, is three things. They looked across all different spectrums of life, and they said mastery of craft, autonomy, and sense of a higher purpose. Think about my dad. He knocked all three of those out of the park. Mastery of craft, I can't speak to that. I'll let you guys do that. But I know it was there. Autonomy, sure. Sense of higher purpose, come on, right? In terms of this mastery of craft, I will say this. I always thought Dad was just better than everybody else at doing what he did, and after talking to you all, I found that to be true. I always kind of thought of him as a lone wolf who never played well in the sandbox with others. So shout out Margaret, Leonard, Sherry, Pam Yon if you're out here, whoever else hung in there with me for however long. Kudos to you guys. Not much higher purpose than walking through fire daily. He's fiercely loyal to his folks, integral in his beliefs. In terms of autonomy, you bet. When I was diagnosed with cancer in 2017, I wanted to get my 23andMe tested so that I could make sure that we had everything figured out in terms of my kids and everybody else. Part of that extra cost allows you some personality traits. One of my personality traits said that I'm very unlikely to be able to carry a tune, and that's true. I got that from my dad, but I gotta think in terms of autonomy that my dad's up there with mom right now looking down at us, probably laughing and probably smiling, but I bet he's singing in pitch Frank Sinatra's My Way. I would tell you the lyrics, but I don't want to ugly cry up here in front of all y'all. Google it sometime. It's funny looking back over your life, the things you remember, right? Donnie D, the old green Cadillac he had, the sweat dripping off his nose in the 1980s while sitting down at racquetball at the racquetball facility after he just smoked some 20-year-old something kid on the racquetball court. That Jett set sign that used to be up in our attic pops in my head. It was a houseboat I think that burned down. I never saw it. I look fondly upon our time spent together at ball games, traveling, watching movies. I enjoyed golfing with him, but I've always kind of sucked at it. But I enjoyed being out there with him, and I think he enjoyed it with me too. But by my estimation, we probably had at least 250 Kentucky sporting events and probably watched that many more on TV. Probably 30 beach vacations, dozens of side weekend trips, at least 500 movies. Movies were a big part of our life. We bonded over movies. I was a kid, and even as an adult. Last movie we watched in theaters, when you could do that sort of thing, pre-COVID, it's 1917. My dad loved history. Man, he ate it up, especially wartime stuff. He had, that was one of his things. Usually it would be him with his popcorn, me with my Twizzlers. We'd be hanging out. I got to tell you though, I always liked the more classic cerebral type of stuff. Things like Step Brothers or Dumb and Dumber. Yeah, that was more my style. I don't know how many stupid movies I put my dad through, but he never said no, regardless of how bad he knew it was going to be, because it was time with me, and he let me pick most of the time. So I give you Ben Stiller from Zoolander. This is your you googly dad. My dad had a great vocabulary, but he loved to screw with me when I was a kid by intentionally mispronouncing words. Instead of Cadillac, it was Cadillac. Instead of facade, it was facati. I didn't know which way was up. I already had a speech impediment. Hell, what else did I need? It was one of his ways to mess with me, and I can think of other forms of abuse that he used to do to me, like, I'd be wrestling with him, and he'd be letting me think I was going to win, and then he would drop me between his knees, and he'd scissor the heck out of me and tickle me till I did something I didn't want to admit. He beat me at horse back in the day. That was pretty abusive, right? Y'all don't know this. My dad was 5'9", but he had nasty, old man, wily veteran game, and I believe to this day, Kareem got the hook shot from him. I don't think I ever actually beat him on the court that he built in our backyard. And this would be even when he would come home at 9 o'clock at night in his loafers and his tie and still kick my butt. If I ever got close, he'd say something like, "Your butt's starting to get tight, isn't it?" So if I ever started beating him physically, he'd start beating me mentally. And his favorite, "Your mom and I are on a railroad track. We're tied down. You only got time to save one of us. Who are you going to save?" You teach this abuse in LCSW school? What do you do, man? I mean, how do you do this? That was his thing, man. I'd always pick mom, of course, let him just go ahead and get cooked. But he would laugh hysterically, slap his knee. You guys know that laugh, right? That's about as bad as the abuse I ever got from me. But my dad, he had it rough coming up. Bottoms of Frankfurt, never known his dad, and his mom dying when he was young. From whence he came to where he went, I would say my dad did pretty well. Not many people can say they lived life on their own terms. My dad did as well as anyone I know. Annette did an awesome job in the obituary, and for those of you that haven't read it, please take the time to do it. It's actually printed in the little handouts here today. He bounced around in his early childhood from family home before landing at an orphanage at age 10, going to get his GED, going into the military early, and then spending some time in the Air Force. Weren't those pictures cool last night? If you look at the word bootstrap in the dictionary, I bet there's a picture of my dad next to it. Dictionary, it's a book we used to look at as he had. He never really dwelled on his crappy upbringing to us, and in fact, I never heard him complain about it or make excuses because of it. In fact, the most I ever heard him talk about it was at my Aunt Jenny's funeral, David, wherever you are. And I learned a lot of stuff. We tucked it away. We never really talked about it anymore. Didn't have to. My dad had it covered. Perhaps this was the secret sauce to the recipe that drove him to provide for others what he never had. He had an insatiable desire to feel needed and to be involved in others' lives. He fulfilled that daily. Now, occasionally these characteristics bled over to the tendencies of overprotection and overcompensation. But you take it and you go with it. And he knew that. He was okay with it. What I'm trying to say here is that if my dad can come through everything that he overcame to do what he did, to serve others, not focus on the negative stuff that he had, his baggage, there's hope for all of us to let go of whatever we're dealing with, whatever we have in our past. So all personal insecurities aside that my dad may have had, he had his faults like we all do. I was sure proud to call him my dad. My mom, she gets a lot of credit for being the spiritual leader in our family growing up. And that's true to a degree. She came from almost a classic upbringing, right? Two parents in the home, beautiful setting, churching, Christian upbringing. And if you wanted to find a spiritual leader as dragging me by my ear every week to go to church whether I wanted to or not, then she checked that mark for sure. But I will say that even though Dad didn't start out with a great relationship with Christ, he ended with one. And she was largely responsible. Working on him a little bit at a time. So don't get me wrong, behind my dad's tough exterior and tremendous true grit lied a heart as big as Secretariat's. I don't remember Mary and Ann coming to live with us, but when they did, I was small. Their parents had died. My dad, he not only allowed that to happen in the 1970s as the head of the household, he took them in compassionately and wept while expressing that he didn't want them to know what it's like to grow up without a real family and a dad. He wasn't just a father. He was my friend. He's my original BFF. Kids. We genuinely enjoyed spending time together. He was the best man at my wedding. He was my soccer and t-ball coach. And sorry, Dad, for never taking off in baseball like you wanted me to. I could sure pick the heck out of the daisies in the outfield, but my dad played semi-pro baseball back in the day, and he loved it. And that's going to talk a little bit more about his athletic prowess. But, thinking back on my early memories of my dad, he and I went to Disney World, just me and him, when I was a kid, and he liked to tell the story that I was 10 years old or whatever, and I'd make him ride Space Mountain over and over. He hated roller coasters, but he wasn't going to be done by some punk 10-year-old kid. He wasn't going to be outdone by some punk 10-year-old kid. So he would never let his competitive nature be beaten, not even then. Now you got to remember, in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't really normal for dads to take their kids on trips like this. It's pretty unusual. We kept that type of close relationship throughout our entire lives. We hit probably half the Major League Baseball parks growing up. At one point, we even talked about getting the rest of them in, and that along with a golf school experience that we never quite got off the ground. So anybody out here that wants to hit those with me, those bucket list items are still out there. And I promised him I'd do them that last night. On one of those trips, circa 1985, the things you remember, right? I was about 13 years old. We went to Boston, caught a couple games, and I remember picking up this black and white framed photo of Larry Bird and Dr. J with each other by the throat. Happened in November 1984. Thought it was the coolest thing ever. He bought it for me. Had this horrible tacky silver frame to it, and my wife hates that thing because it doesn't match anything in the house. But it's been in every apartment, dorm room, frat house I've ever been in. Sometimes in some of those places, you can imagine Hagen Hall in 1990. It was probably the most expensive thing in there. Another trip in April 1997, which was right before I started medical school. He and I took a guy's trip to New York City. There's a great picture of me and him out in the harbor. The World Trade Center's in the back. I haven't found it yet. But during that trip, we painted the town red, as we always did. One of our stops was David Letterman's show. Lisa Kudrow, Phoebe from Friends, was on there. The Verve Pipe, which never made it big. And some 80-year-old dude that was a cobbler that was Italian. You know, the only thing that would have made that show better had that person been an 80-year-old LCSW, right? That was a great trip, and one of my kids still has a sweatshirt commemorating the occasion from David Letterman's show. So with that in mind, I made a top 10 list for my dad. Didn't know how to name it exactly. I thought Who's Your Daddy may not be appropriate today, but that's the kind of dad I had. Here you go. Number 10. Bear with me for a minute. This one's a little long, but I need to set this up. My dad and I, we talked every night. His way of tucking me in. Started out in person when I was a kid. Kiss, covers, the whole thing, man. He never had that. Always ended every conversation with, I love you. You know, my dad was selfless, right? He'd call, he'd say, how are you? I'm good, Dad. How are you? No answer. Next question. No, Dad, how are you? Had to prod him, right? Because he didn't even think about himself when he was talking to me. So he'd answer finally. We'd have a conversation. And it ended this way. That was his MO. That's how he did things on the regular. You know, growing up a small kid, like I said, I haven't lived in Lexington since 1997, but that's been part of my life. These calls have turned into cell phone calls. And for the last couple of years, every time he's called me, there's been an automatic butt dial right after that hangs up. I'm going to miss that. I called Frank this morning from the house, and I actually butt dialed him right after I got off the phone with him. So there you go, Dad. Side note, my wife and kids have come to know this tuck-in procedure and this I love you procedure over the years. And although I am the extra dad that still does that, and husband, I still make sure I do it every night. Kiss and I love you. Before I go to work in the morning, most of the time they're still crapped out in bed, no matter what time it is. Most of the time I'll wake my wife up in the process. Not recommended. That's all from Dad. That was number 10. Number 9, I had the kind of dad who painted his front door purple for his wife, as it was her favorite color, and so it became his. Purple in the Bible represented royalty and great worth. It is also associated with ambition, extravagance, devotion, and independence. Well, if the color fits, my dad wore it well. My dad wasn't the Bible beater type, but the first verse I ever taught Polly was Proverbs 10:4. And today I bring it to you with the VeggieTales version and Polly with her 4 or 5-year-old accent and speech impediment that I passed on. Proverbs 10:4. Hands that don't want to work hard will make you poor. But hands that work hard will bring wealth to you. Wouldn't be a good day without embarrassing your kids, right? Now, each verse in the Bible has at least 70 interpretations by scholarly interpretation. So take that as literal or as figurative as you want it. But if my dad ever had a life verse, I think that would be it. Number 8, I had the kind of dad that gave my mom the same number of roses as their anniversary every year on Valentine's Day. 55 years on this earth together, he got her roses. 55 roses. By the time she died, the last 6 years, he's come out here every Valentine's Day and stuck 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, and 61 roses on this grave. No matter the weather, no matter how long it lasted, no matter if he spent $300 on roses, it just lasts 2 hours. That's my dad. It's the kind of dad I had. And you bet your bottom dollar there'll be 62 roses on this grave on Valentine's Day. 2021. Number 7, I had the kind of dad that loved Christmas so much and decorating that he left the he left the lights on the front tree out front of our house all year round. He loved all holidays and birthdays especially, and he wrote these cards, man. You couldn't read them because his handwriting was horrible. But he could have put Hallmark out of business if he ever wanted to. But I think he found his calling anyway, so he didn't need it. Overcompensation, perhaps. Number 6, I had the kind of dad that spoiled my kids so much. He brought them a huge Sharps box of candy, heart-shaped, at least 50 pounds the thing weighs, and he shipped it to them every year. They act like they hate it, but come on, girls and chocolate. So, sorry kids, that's going to continue to happen as well. We just got to make sure we keep our Shih Tzus out of it this time, right? Number 5, I had the kind of dad that said no matter what, we had to tell each other everything that happens to us health-wise. He was really worried about me after I had my cancer diagnosis in 2017. And we both knew that was a one-way street. It was really, I had to tell him everything, but he didn't have to tell me everything. And we both knew it, and we were okay with it. But he did that because he never wanted me to worry. Number 4, I had the kind of dad that would take you to Keeneland when you were a kid and take all the risk, but give you half or more of the winnings. Number 3, I had the kind of dad that would spoil me, my family, and friends with a lavish dinner on the fly that my wife eventually coined a Daddy Warbucks dinner. Speaking of my wife, I often find tendencies of my dad in her, and sometimes I feel like I may have married my dad, so I may need that counseling as well. I asked her to paraphrase this so I wouldn't get in trouble today, and these are her words, not mine. She leaves multiple actual coffee mugs in the car, which drives me insane. She also is a Christmasilla. She's a perfectionist. She's a clothes horse. She's a shoe horse. She's spendy. She's an overdoer of all things. She's a pain in the rear most days. Can I get an amen? With glimpses of sparkle and fairy dust, just enough to make it work. Amen. And I love her for it. Most importantly, my wife has scientific proof by 23andMe that she is actually more Neanderthal or caveman than my dad, after all. But if I ever see a block of cheese in her floorboard, I'm calling it a day. Number 2, I had the kind of dad that buried all of our family pets personally and cried like a friggin' baby when he did it. Number 1.875, I had the kind of dad that couldn't count so good, but who would also shower my mom's underprivileged students unexpectedly with candy in the middle of the day, thus promptly wrecking the rest of her day while the kids experienced a sugar high like no other, while he laughed hysterically the entire way back to work. Number 1.72, I had the kind of dad who painted my mom's VW Bug into Herbie the Love Bug when she was out of town. Surprise. It's a cool car, though. Number 1.5, I had the kind of dad, Mike, that totally ruined my construct of what counseling is as a doctor. I thought everyone was as good as him. Number 1, I had the kind of dad who gave me the honor and privilege of giving him one last in-person tuck-in and then giving me his best version of wink wink, get the hell out of here, kid, go to work. Right before I left, Thursday morning, 5:30, Mary gave me a minute as she was coming in to relieve me. And he kind of closed his mouth a little bit, and he kind of grimaced. And I took the message. Mary called me about the time I got to Pineville, told me he had died, 7:30, and she was there holding his hand. Maybe the apple doesn't fall far from the tree after all, driving back to work. I guess he won that tuck-in game ultimately. Again, competitive. Baseball was his first love. Maybe this was his version of hitting a game-winning walk-off home run in the bottom of the ninth. I tell you folks, you may not have been a Bible beater, but if that's not agape love, I don't know what is. Back when Mom was getting sick, Dad took some time to understand that in his own way. He said, I'll process it my own way. And when Essie was born, I can remember being at the hospital with him saying, Dad, Mom's getting bad. Why don't you take some time? Why don't you travel? Why don't you do some things? You got the means to do it. We're all okay. We bought him a Hawaiian cruise as a family. He went. He loved it. Pearl Harbor, man. For him, history. But taking off for things like that just wasn't my dad's style. He would just never leave the practice long enough to do that sort of thing. I used to kind of despise it a little bit, maybe sometimes a lot. But after Mom died, I was really glad he had it. The work, the practice, the patience, the relationships, keeping him going, keeping him busy. I'd see 80-year-old folks walking in my office and think, man, my dad's looking a lot better than you are. Big shout out to Sherry, 38 years. Hanging in there. Who does that, man? Add to the list of counseling, right? So, when I was a little boy, she was there. I never remember not being the case. Sherry shared recently with me that Dad had told her over the last few years that he felt like he was really connected with his patients, right? Like he had in the years before. And I feel like I'm really getting somewhere with him, Sherry. To which Sherry said, Bill, you softened up a lot over the last few years. And I'm sure he looked at you like, what in the hell are you talking about, woman? That quizzical look, but I'm sure he processed it in his own way. Self-awareness, maybe not his best trait, but I love that story nonetheless. Each time I'd go on a family vacation or a long weekend with my family, my dad would say to me, I'm really glad you can do that. I'm really glad you have the means to do that. Don't get me wrong, we still got out and about a little bit, me and Dad did. One of the last great trips we took was New York City in 2017. Went to the NBA draft. We scored second row tickets to Hamilton. Stayed in the Marriott Marquis, just walked down there one day and they were sitting there. Took it. He loved it, man. The history, the glitz, the history, the pace. It was just great to watch with him. In terms of his retirement, I read a book towards last few years, more or less, and it said basically, the name of the book is called Halftime, and it basically said that at some point in your life, you get to a half point of life where you start thinking about leaving a legacy instead of running and gunning, earning and learning, raising a family. At some point, you pause. It can happen anytime, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Dad never hit that. My dad, he did it all at once, man. All the time, every day. If Dad ever wrote a book, it'd be called Full Time, Anytime, All the Time, something like that. The book basically says you don't have to retire from something, but more to something. It's a good book, but things change, in life. Now, my dad saying retire was kind of like Fonzie saying love, right? Couldn't do it. Ironically, Dad had no problem saying love. Given that he didn't grow up with a lot of love, I found that to be pretty cool. Am I right? To borrow a phrase from Hamilton, my dad was nonstop. Again, living life on his own terms. Bill Chase shared with me recently that they'd had a conversation on Father's Day. I was really glad they spoke because they had an off-and-on relationship over the years. I'm glad they ended it well. And Bill had just broken his hip, and he was talking to my dad about his hip replacement surgery. And Dad had said, I'm scheduled to get a knee replacement. Unbeknownst to all of us, right? You remember that two-way street? So, he was getting a knee replacement not because it was affecting his golf game, Greg. Not because he was having pain day to day that he was. Not because it was affecting his ability to do his daily activities. It was because it was affecting his ability to work. He didn't want you people to see him with a limp. He didn't want you to see him weak in any way. That's my guy. That's my dog. I asked for one-word descriptions of my dad on Carrying Bridge. Patrick Gary texted me the winner. Dog. My dad had that dog in him. All his life. I'm getting close. This time and place is special for my dad, for our family, and for all those gathered here today. I mentioned my dad wasn't the Bible beating type, and as one of his lifelong friends shared recently in an excerpt, don't make him a plastic Jesus. What this means to me is that my dad wasn't a Bible beating, hellstone and brimfire kind of guy. My dad was real. My dad had a good soul. He had his own relationship with the Lord. And although I know he had lots of questions about God after things he saw in the Korean War, I know we all do. But my dad was baptized in the church, and he made a public profession to Christ as his Lord and Savior, to me personally. It's been both reassuring and refreshing to have heard from so many of you who have shared some of the spiritual side of my dad that I didn't always see. I thank you for that. Because of these things, I'm confident that my dad's up there with my mom looking down on us right now. I'm not comparing what my dad went through the last 24 days to what Jesus Christ went through on the cross. But as my pastor shared last week, Jesus died on the cross between two criminals. Names were never known. On the one side, the guy was mocking him. Why don't you do something, Jesus? On the other guy, the guy was asking for repentance and for forgiveness. And he was allowed into the kingdom. He was remembered on the spot. I think my dad's first half of his life or greater is kind of that other guy. Mom worked on him. And he got there, man. So Dad, I say this to you. You fought the good fight. It's time for you to rest. You've done well. Good and faithful servant. I know you are in his kingdom. I'll leave you guys with this quote from Bill Keane. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. Today is a gift of God, which is why we call it the present. Bill Jett, my best man, our mentor, our rock, my original best friend, my coach, our kids' papaw, our counselor, my dog, my guy, my dad, always was and will always be present, our present. You ready? And Ned's coming up here, share some words. Doug, you're after.
So, if anybody wants to stand up or sit down at this time, go ahead. Don't feel like you can't. I knew Paul was going to be a hard act to follow, and I did not get to see his eulogy beforehand, so there might be a little repetitiveness. But even though I do a lot of public speaking too, I also wrote things down today because I knew this was going to be a tough one. I will concur that Paul was Dad's favorite son for sure. Okay?
Thank you.
But there's something special about a daughter-daddy bond. And ours started really early. So, being 6 years older than Paul, and I think that sometimes Dad thought that might be his last chance at having a boy. So he treated me as such in those early years. He would actively teach me sports like how to beat the boys in horse. Thank you so much. How to beat the boys in horse, which came in handy multiple times. He created a racquetball club for me and my middle school, at that time junior high, friends. And he would take us to racket time and teach us, all the moves. And then it always ended up with a trip to Carla's Pizza. Because a lot of my friends have reached out since then and said that was one of the coolest things any dad ever did. He also taught me how to play and win at pool, reminding you that chalk's free whenever you missed a shot. I've kept that one in my back pocket. But Dad had a sensitive side, and we all know that. I was recently reminded that he accompanied me to my violin lessons from an early age. And my teacher, Kay, who started me in Suzuki, has become a close friend of our family. So she sent me a writing after his passing, and I asked her if I could share a piece with you. This piece was called Remembering Bill. And she had to say, two pair of eyes locked with mine from across the temporary music room. At the overcrowded elementary school, our class was tucked at the end of a hallway, separated from noise and activity by two upended gym mats. Later, I would come to know those twinkling those eyes twinkling as they smiled, but today both pair just seemed sad. The man sat in one of the child-sized chairs, his blonde 6-year-old and her violin on his lap. The guidance counselor had told me when I arrived that Annette's mama had fallen ill while visiting out-of-state relatives. The first grader was sad, she warned. The little face was sad. But throughout the morning, her dad's lap provided comfort, and he gamely participated in all of the parent tasks of the lesson, the only dad in an all-mama group. It was a routine that continued for weeks until Annette's mama was well, and so was my first experience of Bill Jett. While I don't remember those early years of violin, I do recall a later experience where my dad walked down that same hallway, and he sat on a Charles chip can that I had brought treats to school in that day. And he told me that our dog, Jeepers, had died. And I guess I remember that because it was the first time I remember seeing him cry. Wasn't the last, but it was one of the few. He had a kind and gentle spirit, one that was often masked by a tough exterior, a directness that you can only call Bill Jett, and yes, even a few cuss words here and there. He was a renegade, a trendsetter, innovative, and entrepreneurial. I think all of us have gained some of those qualities through him. He was a risk taker and the definition of grit. Well, we all know he had an accomplished professional life, right? And in his community and in his practice. But he had so many personal wins for us and our family. As a young girl, when I was a young girl, we lived in Gardenside. And so my dad staked his claim on our futures in the 4052 zip code and moved us over to Monte Vista Road. There were hardly any houses there at the time, and so he built fresh. We thought he was crazy. We were lucky to stay there at least another 43 years. I could be wrong on the actual timing there, but it was over 40 years. And we made a lot of memories there. A lot of people here would remember that. When we were young, we were frequent visitors of the Lansdowne Shops Baskin Robbins, where he got us chocolate mint milkshakes. I told you he was innovative, right? And took me to the Mousetrap, which was an upscale deli. It's still there, called Cheese Villa, and that's where he later helped me get my first job. He would take me in tow to restaurants, which, again, as Paul said, that wasn't really a thing. Dads didn't really just take their daughters places, but he'd take me everywhere. He introduced me to Chinese food for the first time, to French onion soup at Nellie Kelly's, to the special at Columbia's. And I really think that Dad is the reason that my love for food began. And as Paul alluded to, my dad was a badass athlete. And I do have to tell you that when he was outmatched by strength of the other person, he would literally use his next best skill by getting into the head of the other person and talking his way to the win. He was 30 years older than me, but my peers and people older than me, including many members of the UK rugby team, would come up to me later at the library or Lina's and say, "Your dad just kicked my ass at basketball at LAC. How old is he anyway?" He also was a Class A racquetball player, like I said, at Racket Time, and he continued to hold that until his knees gave out on him. In the 1980s, he built a resort-style backyard, complete with a pool, a hot tub, a basketball court, and a gazebo bar. Just inside was the den, and he always had the biggest TV screen that was in stock, and of course a pool table with free chalk. Complete with phone jacks and electrical outlets. My husband Frank, who was a boyfriend at that time, dubbed it Club Jett, and it stuck. And I know he built this specifically for my brother because I had just gone to college, right? And he wanted his friends, Paul and his friends, to come to their house, and that they did. I think Donnie DeCastro can attest to that. That same year, my dad invested in my college career, paying out-of-state tuition for a state college, UT, University of Tennessee in Knoxville, nonetheless. I think he was probably the only Kentuckian that ever did that. I loved bringing friends back home and introducing them to my family, which was large, and we played a lot of games, and we had a lot of fun. Dad never really participated in the games, but he would walk around and do his thing, and he knew we were there, and he liked the laughter and that type of thing. But I was always proud to bring people home, and inevitably we would end up at Keeneland. Dad had taught us the basics of horse racing early on, like to always bet the gray horse, and how to increase your winnings by betting across the board. But he also originated the daddy bets, and that's what Paul was saying. You really never lost with Dad. In daddy bets, if the horse won, you got to keep all the winnings, but if it lost, you didn't have to pay any money out. So he would get so tickled handing you that money over or letting you go up and cash in the ticket if you rolled enough, that you really knew that he was the actual, he felt like he was the actual winner there. My dad was always present in my life. No matter where I was living, what I was doing, he showed up. I did live out of Lexington for many years, and so he would arrange his continuing education around whatever city I was in at the time, whether it be DC or Nashville or Chicago. And so he would come up without my mom, and we would spend these special trips just, exploring the city and doing whatever the locals did. And I got to tell you, I was as excited to make those special for him as he was to come. We'd visit landmarks, we'd go to sporting events where I got to often return the favor of the Keeneland clubhouse tickets that he would score for us, and I'd get us box seats. That would be like when the Chicago Bulls were in their prime, Michael Jordan days. We would go listen to live music, and that's where I learned that Dad loved blues and jazz and Frank Sinatra, as Paul said. And he was also a very good dancer. I learned that there. Of course, one of our favorite pastimes is we would go to trendy restaurants and try new foods. And he always liked meeting my friends and seeing what I was doing. He was always involved in my work, no matter what it was. As a matter of fact, this is a little side note. When I catered, I used to get to go down to Rupp Arena and cater for stars that would come in. And we'd start early in the day, and we'd set up for the cruise and the stars and that kind of thing. And my dad was as comfortable around a pauper as he was a prince. He didn't care, and he would come in like he was part of the crew or the star or the show, and he would just sit down at the coffee room and eat off the buffet and help himself to all the little fun things. They'd go, "Who's that guy?" And I'd go, "I don't know, I thought he was with you." So anyway, he didn't care, basically. He wanted to be there for me, and I liked that. We discussed things like history, politics, architecture, music, even gangsters in Chicago. And he didn't just talk, he listened, but I learned so much from him. He always made me feel heard, though. I think that that's true of everybody. One of my favorite memories from Chicago was when he came to visit me while I was working at a par 3 Perry Dye golf course. And so Greg and anybody else that golfs might know the significance of that. It was one of a kind. It was located right downtown, surrounded by the Swiss Hotel and the Fairmont, overlooking the Lake Michigan. And we had a lot of regulars that would come in that were somewhat famous. So on this particular day, my friend Ernie Banks was there. And I told him that my parents were coming in. This was a trip he had made with Mom. So he asked me their names, and he said, "I'll be sure to say hi." So when they got there, and after Dad perused the pro shop and got me a lot of street cred with the golf pros there because he bought out about half the inventory, we went into the restaurant before the driving range. And this large fit gentleman over in the corner starts yelling out, "Hey, Billy, why don't you kiss your wife, Phyllis?" And Dad got that look, like that protective look, like, who the hell is that? And he's looking over there, and then Ernie Banks says it again. And when I realized this could just go either way here, that's when I stepped in and I go, "Hey, Dad, you remember Mr. Cub, right?" So Dad did his swagger. Does anybody remember his swagger? Yeah. He swaggered over, and they spent the rest of the day chatting it up, playing on the driving range. And I noticed in his office the other day that he still had that, I think it was 1996, signed basketball from Ernie on his desk. So I know that was important to him too. I could go on and on and on. Maybe one day there'll be a Bill Jett memoir produced. But I do want to leave you with a final story and some parting words. Since he was always doing things for others and basically bought whatever he wanted or needed for himself, he made gifting very difficult. So it took us 80 years, but we finally got him. On the day of his actual birthday, we dropped off 80 balloons at the office. Sorry, Sherry. I'm sure you had to deal with that. And we took him to his favorite restaurant, P.F. Chang's, where I still remember when we all sat down, we're all there, he gets on the phone. You remember this, Mary? And I said, Dad, who are you calling? He goes, well, Paul. I go, well, why don't you just talk to us? We're all here, right? Because, again, Paul was his favorite son. But the real surprise was waiting for him that weekend. And we as a family had collaborated. Dad had told me about his fascination with trains, and I think we had gotten the chance to take a few train rides on those varied trips that he'd make. And so we colluded and kept a secret as a family, which was a feat in itself because there was, there's 18 to 20 something of us at any given day. So my nephew Harris asked him to ride to Bardstown with him so that Harris could buy a gun. He was supposed to meet up with people. I hope I had this a little bit right. Anyway, Dad got a little bit irritated with Harris on the way. He dressed as a roughneck because he knew he was going to buy a gun and he didn't want, anybody thinking he was weak, like Paul said. And Harris kind of drove around and couldn't find the guys or whatever. So Dad started thinking this is a shady deal and we need to cut and run. Well, somehow Harris hung in there, got him to the Bardstown train station where his entire family was waiting, and we took a dinner train ride. And once again, that twinkle in his eye and that smile showed up. The only thing he was mad at is that he didn't get to dress for the occasion, right? Dad had recently moved just 2 miles from me. We bought a new house in December, and he moved into the house that we had lived in, which he had purchased years before. And we had great plans. My son Charlie, who's right back there, was going to walk over there after school and fix some dinners and watch shows and sports on his brand new bigger than ever TV, okay? And Charlie's a good cook. He got that from his dad and his mom, we hope. He was going to cook dinners for him, spend the night, and we were just going to have a great time. We had a lot of plans for family meals. And then COVID came around and the crisis, and we had to shut it down, as my dad would say, for a few months. But we still managed to get some good times in there. And over the last month, we did get to have multiple times that we were together. About a week and a half before he died, I will tell you that we had one of the most honest, long, frank conversations that we had had in a long time. And I agree with Paul. I know that he's with my mom. I do also need to say that my husband Frank has earned the Favorite Son-in-Law Award, and it's not just because he's the last one standing. It's because he really earned it, okay? They respected and cared for each other. I think that Dad thought of Frank as a son. Frank would deliver home-cooked meals to him. I would make them, we'd pack them up, he'd send them over, he'd do his lawn, he'd weed eat, and he was available for whatever project Dad had planned for him, usually with no notice. So we've heard the many stories of how he affected other people's lives over the years. They offer us solace as we put this gentle soul with a tough exterior, direct demeanor, and heart of gold to rest today. Excuse me. While Dad gave me some great advice over the years, I will say that perhaps none was better than this phrase: you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. And I heard that more than once. Generally as it referred to my boyfriend choices or maybe a husband or so. Okay? I think he would want you to know today that he invested in you because he cared about you and because he saw potential in you. And I think he knew that you could be chicken salad even when you didn't think you could. I know that because he did that for me. So thank you for letting me talk.
Good job, man.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask Doug Ruth to come up and say a few words on Dad's behalf. Doug and my dad go way back, and Doug's a psychiatrist, retired. They took many trips together, did lots of great things, and he's kind enough to share a few words. Just one other mention on the pallbearers, Greg and Mike Harris, nephews he loved very much. Harris's grandson, Charlie's grandson, Frank, his only son-in-law standing, and Mike Spare, his longtime colleague who stepped away, who's going to share some words later. Very thankful for you guys. That being said, I did have a whole host of a B team of old brother-in-laws that I was going to throw out here, but and Harris just shared with me that he actually missed the exit twice on that Bardstown trip. You know how pissed Dad would have been in the car, right?
Well, it's an honor and it's a privilege to talk about Bill. I've had the advantage of working with Bill over a period of several years. In my practice, I needed somebody I could refer patients to for psychotherapy. And I found Bill to be by far the most skilled person at that trade. Bill needed somebody he could refer his patients to if they needed medications or hospitalization, and he found I was at least a bit acceptable for doing that kind of work. So we had the occasion to work together many times. Oftentimes we would even see the patient together at the same time, sometimes even their families. When we first did that, I was astonished at seeing what Bill could accomplish. You understand that at the time he was in training, the most popular kind of psychotherapy that was taught was based on the old Freudian theories, in which the therapist did next to nothing. But the patient had to, through their speaking and about their past and their self-reflection, come upon the insight to recognize what was troubling them, what was causing their distress. But as you could imagine, that's not easy because we don't like to look at what would be viewed as our own weaknesses or faults. And in fact, we were taught that there were resistances and defenses that the patient would encounter that would keep them from doing that. And so this would go on for months or years, which was impractical and often ineffective. The first time I worked with Bill, I saw that within a few minutes he recognized what was going on and he explained it to the patient. Instead of going through months of self-reflection, within a matter of hours, this person had already accomplished what they needed to do. So I was really surprised and thrilled to see what he could accomplish like that. And you might ask, well, what about those resistances and defenses? Well, Bill had talents that would overcome those also. He could very quickly gain the confidence and the trust of someone through his speech, gestures, his demeanor, his choice of words, his timing. People would very quickly learn to have confidence in him, to know that he was on the right track, and they would gain the trust to know that he would appreciate their dignity as an individual. So it made for a marvelous type of a thing. He was a maverick. He was self-made as a psychotherapist, and he was innovative as a psychotherapist. His reputation was very broad spread. I enjoyed working with him very much. I learned a great deal working with him. He was also tireless, and he was also relentless. He would never let things stop until he was sure that every form of treatment that was needed was provided and was done in the best possible fashion. He was relentless in doing so, and at the end of the workday, which for Bill was a long day, he didn't just punch a time clock and quit. After hours, he was always available to his friends and his acquaintances. He could recognize what was going on in their lives, and he would bring these same talents to bear in helping those around him. This type of work is very draining. It requires a lot of energy. And I have never seen Bill express any fatigue or any feeling of a need of respite or to take a break from this type of work. He was always willing to go indefinitely. And listening to Paul, I'm wondering if that came from other coffee that he consumed, but wherever that energy came from, he had it and he never tired. With all the these talents that Bill had, another of his characteristics that I admired was his humility. Now, you may be surprised to hear someone speaking of Bill's humility. Someone who enjoyed clothes as much as he did, someone who enjoyed preening. You remember that gesture he had of shooting his cuffs like James Bond. He reminded me of an orchestra conductor getting ready for the curtain to rise when he did that. And he usually did that just when he was about to make some very profound comment. So someone who was so knowledgeable and someone who so repeatedly could see an issue or a solution and would have the responsibility of explaining that and carrying it out. You would think that they would become arrogant, but yet Bill had that humility that I can never forget. And he never was angered at being the brunt of a joke, which often happened, but he always accepted it. He never forced the spotlight upon himself. Whenever anyone was around him, they would feel uplifted, and the same type of talent that he put forth toward helping the patients to feel appreciated as an individual, he did the same for his friends. We all felt much the better after spending time with Bill. Well, Bill has worked so hard, he has earned his rest. I will not disturb it by continuing to rattle on like this, but I would like to join the rest of you in wishing the best hereafter for such a dear friend.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
So Mike Spare is going to share a few words about Dad's life. They go way back, and I'll let him elaborate on that. So Mike.
He taught me to prepare. I don't know, I met Bill, actually we had talked in the mid-90s, and people that were on the healing path with me were seeing him. And so I learned about him in second person. And as I was starting my career, I was always had in focus to go into private practice. So I picked out 3 private practitioners and scheduled an hour of time with 3 private practitioners. And I won't name the other 2, but when I walked in his office, when I felt his presence, when I experienced his whole milieu, his whole environment, you know, I knew this was the man that I wanted to follow, and so I did. And I'd learned on the healing path that if I want what people have, I got to do what they did. And so I did that. And by the way, he didn't charge me. And he told Sherry, he said whatever he needs, you know, you let him know. Whatever he needs, give him carte blanche, you know, to the office. And that's just him. It's who he is, you know. But I immediately knew that I wanted him to be my role model. I got 5 minutes to talk. This is going to be hard. Starting, I don't even know where to start with him, and I don't think I could ever finish, you know. But he had everything I wanted. in every way. You know, he was smart, refined, classy, undying work ethic, beautiful office, busy with patients, coming and going, polished etiquette, and an aura of business. You know, that was Bill Jett. You know, he opened up his office to me. He was Billy L. Jett and Associates. I was Michael A. Sparrett Associates. Whatever he did, I did. You know, and I reaped the benefits. You know, I was successful way beyond. And there's a story, and when we do the celebration, I've got a lot of funny stories, but I got to keep going because Paul's over here and he's gonna. But we've been all over the place together. So that I could remember this morning: Savannah, Marco Island, Chicago, Hattiesburg, New Orleans, Nashville, Durham, New York City, Los Angeles. And I want to say this, I do want to tell this story. We were in Chicago, remember Annette? In 2007, and so we were walking around the, all symposia have bookstore, and we were walking around the bookstore, and this woman came up to him, and this is so descriptive of him. This is so him, and she saw his name tag, and she said, "Well, you're Bill Jett." And he said, "Yes, ma'am." In his very cordial way. And she said, "Well, you're the godfather of clinical social work." And I'm like, I wonder what the hell that means, so afterwards, and that's exactly what I asked him. So afterwards, she left, and I said, "What the hell does that mean?" And he said, "Come over, I got to tell you a story." And I learned, I don't know that he would ever told me. He was humble, but I learned that if it wasn't for him in Kentucky and across, he was the carrier, he was the messenger, he was the key to clinical social work being licensed in Kentucky and in the United States of America. And the person who was the old social worker, Creighton Rowe, is the name of the person in New York City. So I can't say enough about Bill Jett. We were close. We had long, deep talks. The best things I think both of us learned were the talks we had after the conferences we attended. So I'm honored to be able to say a few words, and I can't even begin to talk about how I'll miss him.
Thank you, Mike. So I'm going to do a bad rendition of my dad's strut, which would have been inspired by George Jefferson. But if he was ever called the Godfather, or he was meeting Ernie Banks, it went a little something like this. And then he'd pop, as Doug said. And ask Mike Harris to share a few words. And listen, I know we have to be time constrained today, but this doesn't ever have to stop. We've got Carrying Bridge out there. Anybody that wants to share comments, that's not going to get to it today, want to hear from you guys. Please put them out there. Get them to me. I'll put them out there if you're not comfortable with social media and things like that. Come on up, Mike.
Thank you, Paul. I'd just like to start, and I'm going to be very short. It's not going to be like Aunt Phyllis's, because I love to talk about people that I love. I do. And I think all my family would tell that. But I'd just like to pause just for a moment and go to God's scripture. So, very common. God speaks here in Psalms 23. God is seen as a caring shepherd and a dependable guide. We must follow God and obey His commandments. He is our only hope for eternal life and security. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the home of the Lord forever. I feel very confident God puts us on this earth for two reasons. Number one, to serve him. Number two, to serve others. And I definitely, probably my best memory of Uncle Bill is that he was a child of God. He didn't grow up, as Paul and Annette talked about, in a perfect lifestyle like basically a lot of us have. But to have God at the center, that's the number one thing. I have spoken in the last week with 4 different individuals that's not even from here, that's from our area, and I live in Glasgow. Me and my brother were raised in Glasgow, and our dad was Aunt Phyllis's older brother. Well, the thing is, those 4 individuals, I called and told them about Uncle Bill, because every time I would see them, no matter where it was, that was one of the first questions they asked. How's Bill Jett doing? Because he made that big of an impact on people that's not even from around here and their families. Okay? So that speaks so highly. How many of you can remember the first memory of meeting Uncle Bill? Okay? And I shared this at Aunt Phyllis's funeral. My first, and when you're a child and when you have children, I have 3. I have 3 grandchildren, but it's amazing what they can instill at an early age. I was 2 months shy of my 5th birthday. My brother Greg was born in 1964, and Aunt Phyllis and Uncle Bill came down in Uncle Bill's Volkswagen. We lived in a duplex. Me and my wife was by there the other day, and it brings back memories, and I'm 61 years old now. But it brings back memories of being in that neighborhood and seeing Uncle Bill's car parked there. Well, when they were getting ready to leave, they came out and his car wouldn't start. The reason why, because I had taken a handful or 2 of gravel and put in his gas tank. Okay, you can imagine. I'm almost 5 years old. The impression that he made on me right then. Okay? Well, let's fast forward over 50 years later. My last impression, and I'll go over that in just a second. But just a couple of things about Uncle Bill. When they lived on Monte Vista before he got that nice backyard and that professional basketball court, there was the neighbors right there to the right, and I can't even think of their name, had a basketball goal above their garage. Well, Uncle Bill was the best at playing mind games with you. Okay? I was in high school. I thought I was a really good shooter. I didn't think anybody'd ever beat me shooting basketball. Well, until Uncle Bill. And he had this famous bank shot. He loved that bank shot. Well, I didn't practice that bank shot. So, anyway, he beat me. How many of you remember that signature laugh of Uncle Bill? Oh my gosh, I can still hear it right now. But he would play mind games with you on the golf course, shooting basketball. That's a tricky little booger when you get ready to putt. Okay? Same thing with shooting. Okay, so I was very lucky to grow up in a great, large family in my life. I thank God every day for the examples that I had growing up. And, Uncle Bill definitely, in my mind, from that first time I remember him, definitely played a big role in my life. No question about it, in my family's life. One of the last memories that I have of Uncle Bill, I was a high school principal before I retired, so you can imagine all the different students that I dealt with on a daily basis because I was in charge of the discipline, where they came from. I called him so many times for advice. If a student was having trouble at home with a parent that had an addiction problem or an abusive problem. And it was amazing the advice that he always gave me. One thing that I do remember, all the family reunions, our grandparents, Mama and Papa Harris, Uncle Bill, when they passed away down in the cemetery, he kept that place mowed. He planted dogwood trees, treated them like his own. And this is what I'm saying. A person makes out of their life what they want to, no matter how they start. And he did an amazing job. But I'm a firm believer too that for every good man there is a great woman behind him. And Aunt Phyllis was definitely that. But like I said, I loved them both. My last memory, or not memory, but my last contact with Uncle Bill was Father's Day. Okay? Him and Uncle Joe, I have two uncles, one great uncle left, and one aunt out of a huge family on both sides. But I sent that Sunday morning, during our church service online, I sent Uncle Joe and Uncle Bill a text. Hey guys, happy Father's Day to you all. Even though we don't see each other like we did earlier in life, I have been so blessed richly by God for having placed me to be in your family. What great memories. Love and miss you all. Have a blessed day. Well, Uncle Bill responded back to me that afternoon a few hours later and says, Mike, my sentiments are similar. Miss you, however, you are always present in my heart and thought. That was Uncle Bill. Thank you.
Great, so I love that story of Mike and the gravel. Speaking of far reach, I went to the doctor when Dad first got sick. Hadn't seen this doctor before, and she told her my dad was sick, and she said, I know your dad. She'd grown up in Hoptown, had an eating disorder in the 80s, had seen Dad. He'd helped her. That's it. I'm going to ask David Hammond to close us out. David is his nephew. He's a pastor, Pikeville, Kentucky. He's going to say a few words. He's going to close us in prayer. After that, you won't hear from me again, but here's the housekeeping tips to exit the premises. Anybody that's not immediate family is asked to get in their vehicles and exit promptly. Grab a cup of coffee or water, anything you need. Stay in touch on Caring Bridge. Anybody that didn't get the chance to speak today, please share them with me. Remember, we have a celebration of life where we're going to do this thing the right way. Family, immediate family that would like to see the process to Dad to be vaulted may remain in their vehicles. We can't be out here with COVID with the workers. Cemetery policy. Katie, anything I'm missing? Okay. I thank you all for your time, your attention, and your service, and your love for my dad. I don't know if this is going to play well or not, but I'm going to play you the last message he left on my machine, which was July 12th. This was Monday night. We actually spoke to him on Tuesday night before he got sick. All right, this was on the 12th. I think the day after that was an in-person call where I actually put him on the phone with my wife, who never talks on the phone, and they always love that interaction. But here he goes.
Hey, honey, just give me a call. Just give me a call back. I look forward to talking to you. Bye-bye.
That was it. You can almost hear the breathlessness in his voice. I've got 200 plus messages like that on my phone. So I love you guys. Thank you. David?
I just very quick want to share about my Uncle Bill, who I love so much. And when I think of him and my mom, and they're together now in heaven, they were survivors. No one was a survivor that I ever knew of like Bill, Jett, and my mom. Just think about Bill for a second. No parents, no love. He didn't know what love was. He'd never been loved by a parent. He was thrown basically in a children's home, fearful. Later went to foster homes where he ran away, I understand, all the time. went into the Air Force, a young boy, out on his own, but yet he was such a survivor and full of life and a winner that nothing could stop him. He went on to University of Cumberland, University of Louisville, and became successful in everything Bill did. You know what inspires me about Billy? And I'm going to be 1 or 2 minutes. What inspires me the most about Billy, that will make a better man out of me, was his will to win and never quit and never give up. Billy never admitted he was getting old. If you ever told him he's getting old, you were going to hear something you didn't want to hear. Billy never admitted he was old. Billy, even just the week before his death, or a couple of weeks, was playing golf, working out at a gym, told me he had a trainer, lifting weights, going to work every day. And just the other day, I felt tired, and I said, I don't feel good, and I thought of Billy. I said, wait a minute, if Billy's 84, can play 18 holes of golf, go to work, lift weights, there's nothing wrong with me. So I got up, put my clothes on, and went to that journey. You know, that's what's going to inspire me about Billy. And I think will inspire us all to keep going. And Billy worked to be a winner no matter what it was at, whether it's golf, racquetball, or his business. I'll close with this. I remember he told me he was national president of clinical workers. He said, wherever I go, if I fly into Phoenix, there'll be 10 people waiting to meet me at the airport. I couldn't believe it. He said, no matter where I go. He was the godfather of clinical workers. And how did he become the godfather and the winner? Through perseverance, through a drive that many of us have never known. But maybe we can take the inspiration from Bill Jett and go for your dreams. Never say no for an answer. And be a winner no matter what you go after in life. That's what I learned about Billy. Wednesday I had a prayer meeting and I said, pray for the family of Bill Jett. And an attorney in Pikeville said, Bill Jett? You know Bill? I said, I'm kin to Bill. He said, you're kidding me. He's one of the greatest. He said, we've sent hundreds and thousands down to him, and he has changed thousands of lives. That's what Bill Baird, the attorney at Pikeville, said. That man has changed thousands of lives. That's what I loved about Bill. Bill never admitted defeat. Bill never admitted he was getting old. Nothing ever stopped Bill Jett, and that's going to inspire me the rest of my life. Someone made this statement, well, Bill Jett was the kind of person that I thought would live forever. You know what my answer is? He is. Because of his faith in Christ, and Paul assured me that he accepted Christ. And I know Phyllis made him go to church, and I don't know if he got saved the first time and baptized. He may have. But I think he just wanted to please Phyllis. But I'll tell you one thing he did. He accepted Christ, no doubt, when Paul led him to the Lord, or maybe a renewal. And there's no doubt in my mind that Billy's in heaven right now. I believe Billy's telling a story. It's got half of heaven laughing right now. And I looked at this picture. I believe he's laughing right now in heaven, telling a joke to the saints, because no one could tell a story like Billy Jett. One of my greatest thrills, and I'll close, was as little kids, me and Beth, every Christmas couldn't wait for Billy and Phyllis to come to our house for Christmas. And Billy would take me and Beth upstairs and tell us a Christmas story. And there's not a person sitting here today that cannot tell me I heard Santa Claus and reindeers on my roof, because I'll stand here today saying Billy told it so real, I know without a doubt they landed on our roof. That's how much Bill could tell a story and make you laugh. And I love to be with him. And you know, one day we will be with him again if you know Christ. August the 6th, Billy was reunited with Phyllis. Think of that grand homecoming. And with my mom, Virginia, Jimmy Jett, and those that have went on before. Billy saw them again. And you know what? God saves the best for last. And one day, if you know Christ, there'll be a grand homecoming in the sky. And we'll put our arms around Billy and talk about days gone by as we walk down the streets of gold together. For Paul said, we'll be known as we were known here in heaven. So I thank you all, and I thank Billy for the influence and what he means in my life today. Because Billy didn't die. He lives in our hearts forever. Let us pray. Father, I thank you for the life of Bill Jett. Lord, I thank you for what he's meant to all of us. And Lord, how he loved his family. And Lord, he was so good to my mom. In her last days would bring things and gifts and food. And that's the kind of heart he had. But Lord, most of all, we can rejoice because we know he's with you. And we can rejoice because we know you that we will see him again. For we will have a grand reunion in heaven. And we'll walk with Christ forever and ever. So Lord, bless this family. Let his memories live on. And let the encouragement, the inspirement, the zeal, and the drive that Bill had for life be found in all of us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.